cooks down, it'll kind of shrivel up. So you want to still remain that color and that size a little bit. Alright, so now we've got our kale. So now that I have a bowl to put all this kale into, we are going to move on to our carrot. Now, this recipe calls for matchsticks, which is a form of cutting or a size. So we're going to start by peeling off the dirty, dry skin of our carrot to reveal that beautiful orange color. All right. Now that we have it all peeled, we're going to cut off the end here. And then from here, you make your matchsticks, which you just kind of guess it a little bit, but you want it to be around 1.5 inches. So now that we have them cut, we're going to cut these in half. If I can. So this way we can get a nice flat surface. Okay, so from here, you're going to cut them into little strips, and it's exactly how it sounds, the size of a matchstick. So if it's looking like a matchstick, so you're doing something right. But they're just thin little strips. And once you get to a bit bigger of the pieces, you'll need to cut these in half again, just so that they're all about the same size and that they'll cook evenly. A little trick for these is sometimes they sell shredded carrots instead, or pre-cut carrots at the store. So if you want a little bit of a shortcut, you could also buy those. All right, we've got one more piece. Okay, so now we have our carrot all cut up. I'm just going to toss it in this bowl for now. Moving on to our mushrooms. So when you are washing mushrooms, you don't want to soak them or put them in the sink or run water over them to wash them, because mushrooms are sponges. They're going to absorb all that water, and then when you cook them, all the water is going to come out, make it all juicy. So what we like to do here is we take a wet paper towel or a wet towel and just wipe it down. Wipe all that dirt off, and it's just as clean and didn't absorb all that moisture. So I'm going to go grab a white paper towel, and I'll be right back. So now that we have our damp, wet towel, we just go through with our towel, wipe along all the edges here, and really just all over. And from our one mushroom, we got this much off. So make sure you do not skip this step. Keep going around. And you may notice that we are using some baby bell mushrooms today instead of our shiitake mushrooms. We couldn't find any at the store, and if you run into the similar problem, you can totally use baby bell mushrooms as well. And you don't really need to worry about cleaning the stems off too much because we are going to pluck those off. Alright, last mushroom to clean. Alright, so now that we have them all washed up, what you like to do when you're removing the stem is I just twist it until it comes right out. This is a lot easier than struggling trying to get it out with a knife. So again, just twist and it's completely out. And you can save these if you make homemade stock as well, or if you compost. So it might be a bit tricky. There we go. Then from here, we're just going to cut them into thin slices. So when I am cutting super soft stuff like mushrooms or tomatoes, I always try to guide it with the tip of my knife. So instead of just going down fully and pressing down, I'm just going to take my knife and glide through it. Once I get all the way to the end, I'm just going to take this little piece. And we have beautiful thin slices. And this recipe is also vegan. So if you are taking care of someone and they're vegetarian or vegan, or even yourself, this can be a nice hearty meal for you. So again, just gliding your knife through the mushrooms. Now if you go through and chop it up like this, it's going to go okay, but you got to put a little bit more force into it. And I just don't like putting that much force into my mushrooms. Just a couple more to go. All right, so now that our mushrooms are all cut up, I'm going to move them over to my bowl here and take out my garlic before they get lost in the mushrooms. And while we only have the onion and the garlic left, we're going to start cooking our sweet potatoes. So I'm going to add just a little bit of sesame oil, and sesame oil will give it that nutty flavor. I can get it open. There we go. So just a little bit here. Turn on our burner. Swish it around a little bit. And let that get hot. And once this gets nice and hot, we want to put our sweet potatoes in here and cook them until they're nice and soft. So this depends on the thinness of your potatoes. So that's why I use the peeler to have them nice and thin, almost see-through, so that it takes a little bit less time to cook them. Alright, so we're going to plop these right in here. I'm not sure if you heard that sizzle, but that is what you want to hear when you place your potatoes in here. And we're going to keep our eye on them while we cut up our garlic. So when I am cutting garlic, I like to take the skin off first. So an easy hack that I found was twisting both ends of the garlic piece until eventually it just comes right off. Or another way that you can do this is you can cut off the little root that holds it all together and just peel away. It's a bit hard with gloves on. All right. Just gotta get the stubborn bit off. Okay. So let's check on our sweet potato. We want to keep it from sticking to our pan. So make sure to stir often. All right, and see how they've kind of reduced a little bit? It means they're nice and soft. So I'm going to scoop them out of here. Okay. Moving back to our garlic over here. On TV shows, they'll kind of show you that they mash down their garlic with the knife, but over time this is going to bend your knife if you're cooking a lot, if you're mincing garlic a lot. So what I like to do is I take the hard part of my palm right here, below my thumb, I press down on it and I turn. And this crushes it just as easily. And then from here, you're just going to go through and chop it up really fine until you get that minced garlic consistency. You can also skip this step by buying some pre-minced garlic, but we like to show exactly how to do it by hand. Alright, we've got our garlic all minced. It's going to go in that same bowl as we're putting everything else in. Moving on to our onion. So for slicing an onion into little slices, we call them half moons. It would be almost the same process as dicing it. So we are going to chop off the tip here. So this is the tip, this is the root. We want to keep the root, we like the root. The root is your friend. And then from here, we're going to chop the root in half. And this makes it easier to peel. If you peel it first, you might struggle a little bit more, whereas here you have a nice open place to grab it, and you can just take off the whole first layer. Once again, if you make stock, onion peels and onion skin are absolutely great in stock. Add a little bit of color into there and flavor. Alright, so now to get half moons, all you have to do is make really thin slices from here. So we are just going to go through and try to make some really nice thin pieces. Everything about this sweet potato stir fry is cut really thin. And these are half moons, or our little rainbows. And our other half. Okay, so that is our onion. That is all of our veggies. And on the recipe, we have a sauce that goes on top as well. So that sauce has already been made. It's just a little bit of cornstarch, some brown sugar, soy sauce, and some chili flakes. So super easy sauce, and it tastes delicious. All right, next up, we are going to start cooking our other veggies. We are going to add a little bit of vegetable oil this time to our pan to kind of saute them up. And this is when making sure that you cut your vegetables all small, thin, and the same size comes in handy. Because when you're sauteing, mushrooms aren't going to cook at the same time that carrots are. So that's why you want them all to be really the same consistency. So now that we have our oil in here, it's all heated up, we're going to add that in there and hear that beautiful sound of the sizzle. And we are going to keep our eye on this until they become nice and sauteed. And while that's cooking, we are going to add a little bit of salt and pepper to really flavor it up. And this is when you start to really get hungry, because it smells so good. So while that cooks, we're going to talk a little bit about our buckwheat noodles. Now, buckwheat noodles might be a little bit hard to find. If you live by an Asian market, then you are in luck. So really any Asian noodle can work here, but we do like our buckwheat noodles because it has lots of fiber in it and it is good for you. So now our veggies have kind of sauteed a little bit, gotten all cooked. So we are going to place it right in the bowl with our sweet potato. I have a couple of stragglers, but that's going to be okay. All right. So now we are going to cook our kale a little bit. So I'm going to add a little bit more veggie oil here just so we don't get it stuck to the pan and all crisped up. And you want to cook your kale at a different time because kale is going to take less time. It's going to kind of shrivel up pretty fast and cook at a different consistency than the rest of your veggies. So we're just going to watch this. Wait for it to kind of cook down a little bit and shrivel up. And we have our buckwheat noodles ready and cooked over here. And they just cook for about 5 minutes in some boiling water. So super easy. And don't let their look throw you off. They're really good and good for you. So while these are cooking, we're going to kind of toss together the rest of it. And you could also add spinach instead of, replacing the kale for spinach. Get a little bit more color in there, a little bit more greens. And I think that it would still be delicious. All right, this kale is starting to shrivel up. So we're going to add in actually all of our ingredients to the wok. And at this point, we're going to add in our sauce. So I'm going to really spread that around here. And stir it up. And depending on how you like your stir fry, if you want a little bit less noodles, a little bit more veggies, you can kind of play around with the portions of this meal. And the sauce just really brings it all together, makes it smell delicious, and I cannot wait to try it. All right. Now that it's all kind of all together, the sauce is in there, we are ready to plate up. So now that we have plated up, we can add a little bit of garnishing to it. So roasted sesame seeds are great on here, adds a good look, and so are scallions. So when I'm garnishing with scallions, I like to cut on a bias, which is basically just cutting them at a diagonal. So you start like this. And this adds a really nice kind of look to them. So instead of just being circular, they're a nice little oval. We're just going to cut off a little bit of the green on here and add it onto our dish. And a little bit of sesame seeds on there would look amazing, I think. You can also serve this with a side of gochujang or maybe some teriyaki. So now we're moving on to our Korean bibimbap. Now, if you started your rice earlier when we were talking about it, it takes about 45 minutes. So if you're just doing this recipe, I would recommend doing it a little bit beforehand, or maybe even a day beforehand, and just heating that rice up a little bit. And the reason why I say this is because of the bibimbap's background. So it's over 1,000 years old, and it is kind of a bit of a culture thing. So farmers and just people in the community would come together, bring all their leftover crops and veggies and rice, and just make one big feast for everyone, and that would be bibimbap. So we're going to do that today, and if you have any leftover veggies like kale or mushrooms or anything at the end of the week, this is a great way to use those up. So we're going to start with our meat. When you are cutting any meat and veggies in the same dish, you want to make sure that you have two separate cutting boards. So we have our blue one for our meat, and then we have our red one back there for our veggies later on. So with our meat, we want to start by cutting off any of the fat that you see. And we've got a pretty clean one today, but you really just want all those little white bits off and all the fat and the gristle. Okay. And then in this recipe, it calls to cut it against the grain. So how you can kind of tell is you can see all the little lines kind of going through the steak, and you want to just cut the opposite direction of where they're going. So we want these to be nice and thin strips, and all relatively about the same size. And you want these nice and thin because we're just giving them a quick sear in our wok. once they marinate and once we're to that step. So thinking ahead, we want these nice and thin so it takes less time to cook. And you can also buy pre-cut sirloin at the store. Sometimes you can find it, and that'll just be one less step for you to work on. So make your life a little bit easier. All right, now that our meat is all cut up, I'm going to move this back here. And we are going to plop our meat into our marinade, which is already pre-made, but it is in the recipe for you guys. And there's just a little bit of soy sauce, some green onion, roasted sesame seeds, and a little bit of brown sugar and white sugar, and rice wine vinegar, which really adds that flavor to it. And this marinade smells so good, and I'm so excited to try this recipe. So we're just going to really get in there. So I've got gloves on. I'm just going to kind of toss it around in there. And we're going to let this sit while we work on the rest of our veggies. Alright, so now that we have cleaned up our station of that raw meat and washed our hands, put on a new pair of gloves, we are ready to get back into the veggies. So, once again, just like I said in the recipe before, we are just going to take our wet paper towel to wash these mushrooms so that they don't get all sponge-like. And we don't have bean sprouts today. We couldn't find them, but they usually are at Kroger or Walmart. So if you are looking for some bean sprouts to make this an even better dish, then you can look there. Alright, and then for this one, we also do not want the stems. So we're going to pluck those right out by twisting them. A little bit of extra there. Alright, stems all removed. And we're just going to cut them pretty thin again. For this one, we don't have to be as precise about it. And you can also substitute some things. If you or maybe the person you're taking care of doesn't like mushrooms or doesn't like carrots, you can totally take them out, replace them, and really fit the recipe to your own needs. Because this recipe in particular has evolved a lot over the 1,000 years that's been around, and everyone makes it a little bit differently. Alright, we're going to toss these back into our bowl. Now moving on to our carrots. For our carrots, once again, we're going to peel off that skin and reveal that beautiful color. And it calls for 3 medium carrots, I believe, but we had these large ones, so I'm just going to do 2. All right. Clean up our area a little bit, and then we'll get to julienning them. So julienne is another term for the consistency of which you want your cut to be. But we have a nice, easy trick to this that really just saves you a whole lot of trouble. And this is a julienne peeler. So this will do all the work for you and cut it into nice, thin strips. And this is the consistency of a julienne cut. So I just like to keep my carrot flat on my cutting board and peel off as much as I can, switching sides to get as little waste as possible. All right, beautiful. And I think that's all we are going to get out of that, but look how much waste we have. It's so thin. Let me chop off this little end here. And we're going to go in with our other carrot. And these julienne peelers are really not too expensive. You can find them on Amazon or at probably Walmart too for a pretty cheap price. But it does save a whole lot of time. All right, I think we're all done with this one as well. So you may be thinking that this size is not as, big as this size. And that is okay because we are going to take our knife because we don't want those really big pieces. So we're going to take our knife and just cut them to kind of be the size that we want. So now we have our carrots all julienned. We'll place them back into our bowl. And then we are going to julienne our English cucumber as well. Now it's important in this recipe that it is a English cucumber instead of a garden cucumber, because garden cucumbers are going to be a bit too watery, a bit too seedy for us, because we want to do the same thing that we did with the carrot. And if we have a whole ton of seeds on the inside, that's not going to work too well in our favor. So you just go through the skin and all to get these nice, beautiful strips of cucumber. And you still will have a little bit of trouble with the seeds in the center, but not as much as you would with a garden cucumber. We're going to switch, do the sides, trying to get as little waste as possible. But I think that is all we're going to get out of it. All right. And then same thing as the carrots. We want our slices to be around the same size. So we're just going to go through and make a couple of cuts. and toss it back into our bowl. Now that we have that all done, we are going to go ahead and put them in our wok to kind of saute a little bit. We're going to add just a little bit of sesame oil to get that nutty flavor. We're going to move that oil around just like before and pop our veggies in here and hope for that beautiful sizzle. There we go. So we're going to keep our eye on this. We would just want to soften them up a little bit. And since these are a bit thinner, Julienne is a bit thinner than the matchsticks, we are going to keep them on there for a little bit less time than we did for our sweet potato stir fry. And next we are going to cut up some kale to also throw in our wok in a little bit. And we're just trimming this off the stem. And we want to cook our veggies first before our meat because we want to make sure that the meat picks up all of the flavors that we've been cooking in. And now that these are nice and softened up, I'm going to take it off the heat and put it right back into our bowl. All right, looking beautiful. And what I love about this recipe is the variety of veggies that are in here just gives it all sorts of different pops of color and just kind of brightens your day a little bit. Okay, we've got one more stalk of kale here, or one more rib. We want these a bit smaller than last time, so we're going to cut them up a bit more. All right. Now we are going to add a little bit more of that sesame oil. Heat up our pan. We are going to toss our kale in here. And I don't think my kale is going to fit in my bowl with the rest of these, so I'm going to be right back and grab a bigger bowl. And now that we've got our bowl, we're just waiting on this kale to kind of cook down a little bit. And the smaller you get them, the faster it will kind of shrivel up. but we want to really coat it with that oil, keep it nice and stirred around so that all the kale gets that nutty flavor to it. You could also add a little bit of spinach to this. Like I said, pretty much any veggies that you have left over that you think would be good in this. Alright, I think we're getting there. Getting nice and shriveled up. Kind of reduced down a little bit. So we're going to go ahead and take that off the heat. And I want to try my best to get all these veggies off. Alright, and I'm going to go ahead and say that it has been around 30 minutes of that steak marinating. So we're going to go take that out and start searing that up. So before we cook our meat, we want to make sure that our wok is nice and hot because we want it to take just a little bit of time to sear all of that. And when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you have a nice single layer of the meat instead of just throwing it all in one batch. So do multiple batches to make sure that it all gets cooked evenly and nicely. Alright, so I think we're about there. I'm going to do one little test strip. Oh, we've got it nice and hot, I'd say. I'm going to be smart and use some tongs. Alright, so right about there I would say is a nice single layer. And you can kind of see it'll start to sear. And once they sear on one side, you flip them over to the other. And you want to save this marinade because that is going to turn into our sauce later down the road. And this just smells amazing, you guys. I hope that you make this dish at home for yourself because even just the smells is worth it. So I'd say that this piece right here is nice and crisped up. It's nice and brown. So we are going to go ahead and put that in our bigger bowl that we're going to mix everything together in. And you do want this at a nice high temperature, but you also don't want to leave this pan just sit and walk away and go do something, because it will easily burn and get through your strips, and woks are hard to clean when they're burned. And we just take our pieces out as they're getting nice and crispy. And our last little piece here. It turned out our heat because our oil is smoking just a little bit. We're going to put in some more. Kind of spread these out. All right, wonderful. And your second batch is usually going to be a little bit faster than your first batch, just because the pan is already hot, the oil is hot, and it's completely ready to go. And this process of cooking them shouldn't take more than about 3 minutes per batch. And if you can see it on the camera, I'm not sure if you can, but our sauce is a little bit more darker now, which is making the meat turn out a different color. And this is perfectly natural. It's just that the marinade has kind of gotten into the oil, may mix a little bit of colors. So no need to worry. You didn't do anything wrong. It's not burning. It is just becoming more of a sauce than it was a marinade, which is actually what we are going to do with our marinade, our leftover marinade. Once all of this meat is all cooked up, we're actually going to add in a little bit more oil into here because I'm seeing more marinade than oil. So we're going to add just a pinch of it. And we're going to plop in a new batch. All right, and that is all of our meat. So this will be our last batch. I just love a stir fry. My favorite is probably a sweet potato stir fry, which it's a little bit different than the one that we did. We use a little bit of a sirloin as well, so it's a bit of a mix between the two. So it's like cubed sweet potato instead of rice, and then all your veggies, and then your cooked sirloin, and it is definitely one of my favorites. So if you want to, in this recipe, you could also substitute the rice out for some cooked sweet potatoes. While we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and toss in our other veggies to this bowl. Look at all of that color. I really just love meals with all sorts of different colors in them. Truly think it makes it look a whole lot better, and maybe even taste a little bit better, because you eat with your eyes. So this piece is looking nice and crisp. Alright, so now that our meat is all done, we are going to turn down our heat a little bit, down to about medium-low. And see all of this juicy marinade right here? We are not going to let that go to waste. We're going to add in the rest of our marinade here, and we're going to let that thicken up, and it will end up being a sauce. Now, if you're worried about there was raw meat in it, how are you going to cook that out? Well, we are going to bring it a little bit to a boil, bring it to a temperature that will kind of get rid of that raw meat. So we'll cook it down. Now I'm actually going to turn it up a little bit over to medium to get that going, speed up the process a little bit. And this way our sauce will have all of the vegetable flavors that we had in this wok and all of the meat flavors that we had. So this is really going to be a delicious sauce that tops off the entire dish. Now we want to keep stirring this around, making sure it doesn't stick to the bottom, because there are those green onions in there. And let that thicken up. Now that it is boiling, I'm going to turn it down to low. To let it simmer a little bit and thicken up. Alright, so while that does its thing, thickens up a little bit, we're going to talk about serving it. So this is traditionally served with a over easy egg on top or an omelet on top. So that's really up to you, but I find that the fried egg or over easy egg is going to be a lot easier than making a whole omelet. So, since we're just doing a nice little single serving here, let me check on this real quick. We're going to grab a bowl Actually, I'm going to hold off on this and get our rice into our bowl to start with, and then we can work on our egg so our egg is nice and hot and runny when we serve it. So to get our rice, I'm just going to scoop out a good layer. I think that's a good amount. Maybe one more scoop. Alright, so now that we have our rice, we've got our sauce, we have our meat and our veggies. We're going to do one last toss on this. And I think that this just looks fabulous. We are going to top it with our veggies. Get a good old scoop in there. Makes it look real nice. Alright, so now that I've got my spatula, I put just a bit of oil into my pan. I heat up a little bit. And when I crack my egg, I want to crack it on a nice flat surface. And just give it a good confident crack so that way you get no eggshells in your egg. Alright, and we're going to let that cook a little bit. Our sauce is nice and thickened up. And at this stage, you can add in a little bit of salt and pepper to your egg, just to give your dish a little bit more flavor. But you don't have to work too hard on seasoning this up because that marinade, that sauce, adds a whole ton of flavor to this dish. Alright, we're going to let this cook a little bit more. And I'm actually going to see I think it needs a little bit more on this side. And like I said, you could do a nice omelet, which in that omelet you could add stuff like maybe green onions, some more salt, some pepper, which would enhance the flavors of this dish. And with that, you can just cover it right on top, or you can cut it into strips or bits, and it will still look absolutely amazing. I'm going to try to get underneath it here and hopefully not crack it. Eggs are not my specialty. Here's to hoping. Oh, I cracked a little bit, but that's okay. So we're going to just let that finish up on that side. And it may be a little bit cracked, but that's okay. Maybe you're a better egg cooker than I am. It will still taste amazing no matter how it looks. And that's my belief in cooking. Alright, so now we're going to scrape this up. Oh, it still looks beautiful. It turned out great. Just gotta trust the process. Turn off our heat here. And now you have an amazing bibimbap to share with your entire family.